What if I told you that the world's most controversial billionaire, the mastermind behind Tesla and SpaceX, the man shaping artificial intelligence, politics, and even the future of Mars, once sat in a tiny Palo Alto office next to a group of scrappy coders, fighting just to keep the lights on? And what if I told you he was not alone? In that same room sat a law graduate who failed to land his dream job at the US Supreme Court, but would later become one of Silicon Valley's most feared investors. Sitting across the desk was a young immigrant from Ukraine whose family fled the shadow of Chernobyl and who believed only in the power of code. Add to the mix a future co-founder of LinkedIn, a sharp McKinsey consultant ready to gamble everything, and dozens of other young rebels who would one day transform global finance, social media, and technology. This was PayPal, not the payment giant we know today, but a fragile startup constantly on the brink of collapse, plagued by fraud, office politics, and endless battles with competitors. Yet, from this chaos emerged a group so influential that journalists later called them the PayPal Mafia. It is no exaggeration. The alumni of this little company went on to create or fund nearly every major tech firm you use today. Their combined net worth is higher than the GDP of New Zealand, and their fingerprints are everywhere, from the electric cars you drive, to the platforms where you connect with friends, to the satellites now orbiting above your head. But here's the question that has haunted Silicon Valley for decades. How did one struggling startup produce more billionaires than almost any company in history? To answer that, we must go back to the beginning, back to 1986, back to the day the world witnessed one of the worst nuclear disasters in history. And in the ashes of that tragedy, the unlikely story of a boy named Max Levchin began. The boy who would write the first lines of code for PayPal. Max Levchin, the refugee coder who carried a dream. The story of PayPal begins not in California, but in the crumbling Soviet Union. In April 1986, the world was shaken by the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. For most of us, it was a distant headline. For the Levchin family, it was survival. Max Levchin was only 11 years old when radioactive clouds swept across Ukraine. His parents, both physicists, understood immediately what the fallout meant. To them, the danger was not just nuclear contamination. It was the realization that their homeland offered no future for a child with sharp intelligence and a burning curiosity for machines. As Jews in the Soviet Union, the Levchins also carried another burden: discrimination and closed doors. By the late 1980s, the writing was on the wall. The Soviet Empire was collapsing, the economy was in ruins, and opportunity was shrinking by the day. So in 1991, just weeks before the official fall of the USSR, the Levchins quietly packed their bags, left everything behind, and boarded a plane for the United States. They arrived with almost nothing but a dream. For 16-year-old Max, America felt like stepping onto another planet. He would later describe those first days as smiling ear to ear every single day, as if every breath of air in the free world was a miracle. Settling in Chicago, Max faced the immigrant's classic test: a new language, no money, and an uncertain future. But one thing was clear from the beginning: his obsession with coding. He enrolled at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, a campus famous for its computer science program, and spent endless nights in the lab, writing code that few could understand, but everyone recognized as extraordinary. While still a student, Max and his roommate started a small consulting firm. Their biggest creation? A primitive email list manager, basically an early version of what we now know as MailChimp. They eventually sold it in 1998 for a modest profit. But for Max, this was not about money. It was about proving that his ideas had value. Flush with confidence, he packed his car and drove west, to Palo Alto, California, the beating heart of Silicon Valley. The move felt reckless, even dangerous. But Max believed the future was there, in that small corner of Northern California where garages turned into billion-dollar companies. What he did not know was that in Palo Alto, his path would cross with a man who would become both his partner and his opposite, Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel, the failed lawyer with a ruthless mind. If Max Levchin was the quiet coder, Peter Thiel was his mirror opposite, sharp-tongued, calculating, and with an instinct for power that made him both admired and feared. Born in Germany and raised in California, Thiel seemed destined for prestige. He graduated from Stanford, then Stanford Law, with the kind of resume that normally opens the golden gates of the U.S. Supreme Court. That was his dream, to clerk for the highest court in the land. But the court had other plans. His application was rejected. For most ambitious law graduates, this would have been a crushing blow. For Thiel, it was liberation. He saw it as proof that the traditional paths, law firms, clerkships, politics, were dead ends. If the system would not give him a seat at the table, he would build his own empire. Thiel launched a small hedge fund, diving into the world of financial markets. He had a gift, a cool, analytical brain that dissected economics with surgical precision. But fate had something else in store. One evening, Thiel gave a lecture at Stanford on global finance. Among the students in the room was a lanky, awkward immigrant named Max Levchin. After the lecture, Levchin noticed Thiel cornered in an awkward fundraising pitch, struggling to win over potential investors. Levchin, ever the opportunist, stepped in. He introduced himself and with nervous confidence pitched Thiel on a strange idea: security software for a new device called the Palm Pilot. The concept was niche, almost absurd. Instead of bulky physical tokens for logging into secure systems, Levchin proposed using encrypted software on handheld devices. To most investors, it sounded too small. But Thiel saw something different. He saw firepower in Levchin's mind, the kind of technical brilliance he could harness. Within days, they met again at a local diner. Over greasy plates of food, Thiel agreed to give Levchin $100,000. That check, casually written in a California restaurant, would fund the company that later became PayPal. What brought them together was not just business, but a strange kind of intellectual chemistry. Both men loved puzzles, brain teasers, and mental combat. Levchin once challenged Thiel with a classic riddle. 2 ropes, each burns for exactly 60 minutes, but not at a consistent rate. How do you measure exactly 45 minutes? Thiel nailed the solution instantly. Burn both ends of one rope and one end of the other. The first rope burns out in 30 minutes. At that moment, light the other end of the second rope, which will take 15 minutes to finish. Total, 45 minutes. For Levchin, it was confirmation. This man was not just clever, he was relentless. If Levchin was the engine, Thiel was the driver. And together, they began building something that would soon collide with an even bigger force: a young South African named Elon Musk. From the very beginning, the partnership of Max Levchin and Peter Thiel looked unlikely. Levchin was the introverted engineer, happiest when buried in lines of code, while Thiel was the sharp-tongued philosopher-investor who thrived on debate and persuasion. Yet, in that clash of personalities lay the perfect formula. Levchin built things. Thiel convinced people why those things mattered. Their company, at first called Confinity, was hardly the sleek financial empire we imagine today. The early product was a security app for Palm Pilots, a quirky idea that quickly showed its limits. After all, how many people actually carried Palm Pilots? And how many wanted to use them for security tokens? The market was small, and venture capitalists were not exactly lining up. But what kept Confinity alive was the relentless chemistry between its founders. Levchin coded obsessively, while Thiel maneuvered with ruthless efficiency. Over dinner one night, Levchin witnessed just how far Thiel could bend reality. Their then CEO, John Powers, refused to relocate full-time to Palo Alto. For Levchin, it was an annoying inconvenience. For Thiel, it was an opportunity. Thiel spent 3 hours carefully explaining why Powers should step down, speaking in calm, logical tones. He barely raised his voice, but every argument chipped away at resistance until finally, Powers agreed. Levchin sat in silence the entire time, stunned. He would later call it a hardcore Jedi mind trick, realizing that persuasion itself could be as powerful as code. Still, they knew their Palm Pilot project was not enough. They needed a pivot. That is when Levchin had the spark. What if money could be sent digitally through an email address? No clunky hardware, no shared devices, just a universal link that anyone, anywhere, could use. The idea electrified the team. When Thiel explained it to his friend David Sachs, then a rising star at McKinsey, Sachs said without hesitation, "If that is really what the company's going to do, I will quit my job tomorrow." And he did. That single pivot transformed Confinity into the early version of PayPal. Suddenly, it was not just about security, It was about the future of money, but as they were preparing for liftoff, they realized someone else had already been circling the same idea, and he had a war chest far larger than theirs. His name was Elon Musk. If Levchin was the coder and Thiel the strategist, then Elon Musk was the disruptor, a man who seemed less like a business partner and more like a force of nature, crashing into Silicon Valley. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, Musk grew up as the kind of kid who would disappear into books for hours and spend nights teaching himself programming on a Commodore computer. But he also grew up restless, convinced his future could never be confined to the borders of apartheid South Africa. As a teenager, he left for Canada and eventually made his way to the United States, where opportunity was bigger than the African sky he had left behind. At Queen's University in Canada, Musk did something almost nobody else would dare. He cold called the chief strategist of Scotiabank, Dr. Peter Nicholson, and simply asked for a job. Nicholson was so impressed by the audacity that he gave him an internship. Musk's time in banking, however, quickly soured. He pitched radical ideas, like converting distressed Latin American debt into profitable securities. The bankers laughed. For Musk, it was proof that the financial system was broken, cowardly, and begging to be reinvented. He transferred to the University of Pennsylvania, earned degrees in both physics and economics, and was on track for a PhD at Stanford. But 2 days into the program, he dropped out. Why study theory, he thought, when the future was waiting to be built? Together with his brother Kimball, he founded Zip2, a company that offered online city guides for newspapers. Musk was brilliant, but notoriously difficult. He micromanaged engineers, rewrote code without permission, and humiliated colleagues in public. The board eventually stripped him of the CEO title. Still, when Compaq bought Zip2, Musk walked away with $21 million at just 27 years old. Flush with cash and restless as ever, Musk launched a new company with a bold idea: reinvent banking itself. He called it X.com, a name that sounded mysterious, futuristic, and just a little dangerous. Unlike traditional banks, X.com promised everything online: checking, savings, investments, insurance. To Musk, this was not just a startup. This was destiny. He convinced a top Canadian executive, Harris Fricker, to leave his $1 million salary and join him. Colleagues would later say, "He's one of the greatest salesmen I've ever met." But cracks formed quickly. Fricker wanted to play safe with regulators, while Musk pushed to break every rule in the book. Why slow down, Musk thought. If we move fast enough, the rules will not matter. Eventually, Musk fired Fricker. By then, X.com had built a sleek online banking platform, complete with one feature that seemed almost trivial: the ability to send money by email. Musk believed this would change the world. He was right. But what he did not realize was that a smaller company, just down the street in Palo Alto, was working on the exact same idea. Its name was Confinity. Its founders, Max Levchin and Peter Thiel. The stage was set for one of the fiercest startup wars Silicon Valley had ever seen: the death match, PayPal versus X.com. By late 1999, two tiny companies were locked in a death race on the same battlefield. On one side, X.com, Elon Musk's sleek digital bank with millions in venture backing and a founder obsessed with speed. On the other, Confinity, Peter Thiel and Max Levchin's scrappy little startup, running out of money but armed with an idea that was spreading like wildfire. The battleground was eBay. Thousands of small sellers were desperate for a fast, safe way to accept payments. Credit cards were clunky, checks were too slow. PayPal's email-based transfer system fit perfectly into this gap. But Musk was watching closely, and X.com offered the exact same thing. The war began with a bribe. Both companies offered new users $10 for signing up and another $10 for every referral. It was the .com equivalent of handing out free cash on the street. Sellers and buyers flocked in, not just for the service, but for the free money. At one point, X.com and PayPal were literally next-door neighbors in Palo Alto. Employees crossing the street would glance suspiciously at the other building, paranoid that secrets might leak. Levchin even warned his team, "If you're near the old office, be careful what you say. The walls might have ears." Inside X.com, Musk rallied his troops with chilling intensity. In a company-wide email, he wrote, "Kill them dead. Die, die, die." To him, Confinity was not just a competitor, it was an enemy that had to be exterminated. But war was expensive. Both startups were bleeding cash. Every free $10 cost them more time they did not have. Levchin's engineers were burning out. Musk's employees were running on fumes. It became clear only one company would survive. Musk made the first move. He proposed that X.com acquire Confinity, offering just 8% of the combined company to PayPal's team. It was an insult. Levchin's blood boiled. The PayPal team walked out of the meeting. Talks collapsed, but reality hit hard. Neither side could sustain the losses. Finally, after tense back and forth, a merger was struck, a 50-50 split. It was a shotgun wedding, forced by desperation. Musk seethed, believing X.com had the deeper pockets and deserved more. Thiel, ever pragmatic, accepted, knowing survival was better than pride. The rivals were now one company. But peace was an illusion. Inside the new PayPal, a fresh civil war was about to begin, one that would push Elon Musk to the brink of betrayal. Civil war inside PayPal. The merger may have ended the war with X.com, but inside the new company, another war was brewing, this time against its own leader. Elon Musk had taken over as CEO of the merged PayPal. At first, employees were energized. Musk was relentless, demanding, and visionary. He pushed his team to move faster than anyone thought humanly possible. 36-hour coding marathons were common. Engineers slept on the floor, curled up on stacks of cardboard, only to wake up and dive straight back into the code. But Musk's leadership came at a cost. He had a habit of micromanaging, rewriting engineers' code without warning, and humiliating team members when they failed to meet his impossible deadlines. He famously told his staff, "If you can't tell me the 4 ways you screwed something up, you probably weren't the person who actually worked on it." His obsession grew even stranger. Musk became fixated on rebranding the entire company as X.com, insisting that PayPal was just a feature, not the company itself. To him, calling the business PayPal was like calling Apple the Mac. The brand, he believed, was holding them back. Then came the most dangerous idea of all. Musk wanted to scrap the company's Linux foundation and rebuild everything on Microsoft tools. Developers warned it would be a disaster. It would set them back months, maybe years. But Musk refused to budge. The plan drained morale, exhausted engineers, and worst of all, version 2.0 of the platform never shipped. The board began to lose faith. Behind closed doors, senior executives whispered about Musk's recklessness. Max Levchin grew increasingly frustrated. Even Peter Thiel, the man who had once admired Musk's ambition, now saw him as a liability. And then, the moment of betrayal. In September 2000, Musk boarded a plane to Sydney with his new wife for their honeymoon. While he was away, the management team made their move. They quietly organized a vote of no confidence. Without Musk in the room to sway anyone, the outcome was clear. He was stripped of his CEO title. When Musk returned and learned of the coup, he was blindsided. His response was not anger, but heartbreak. "This whole thing is making me so sad that words fail me," he wrote. "I have given every last ounce of effort, almost all my cash from Zip2, and put my marriage on the rocks." It was a brutal betrayal, yet Musk accepted it with grace. He kept his equity, becoming the company's largest individual shareholder. For him, PayPal was still his baby, even if he was no longer allowed to raise it. The board turned to someone they trusted to stabilize the chaos. The strategist, the cold, calculating hand who had been waiting in the wings. Peter Thiel takes the throne. The war against fraud. When Peter Thiel stepped in as CEO, the battlefield changed overnight. If Musk's war was against competitors, Thiel's war was against something far more dangerous: fraud. From the outside, PayPal looked unstoppable. By mid-2000, it had over 2 million accounts, and nearly 40% of eBay auctions were completed through PayPal, compared to just 9% with eBay's own payment system. Growth was explosive. But behind the curtain, the company was bleeding. Hackers, scammers, and fraud rings targeted PayPal relentlessly. Fake accounts sprouted like weeds. Stolen credit cards were funneled through the system. Russian hacker forms even coordinated attacks in real time. For every dollar PayPal made, thieves were trying to steal another. Thiel knew the company was hanging by a thread. I never fully appreciated just how close this company came to going under again and again, he later admitted. Levchin, now leading the technical fight, went into the trenches. He and his engineers studied the enemy, infiltrating hacker forums and dissecting their tactics. Out of those long nights emerged innovations that would change the entire industry. First came CAPTCHA, those distorted text puzzles that force users to prove they are human. Levchin's team scaled it into a global standard, stopping waves of bots in their tracks. Then came something even more powerful, a real-time fraud detection system. It scanned patterns of behavior across millions of transactions, flagging fraud within seconds. The effect was dramatic. By 2001, PayPal had one of the lowest fraud rates in the entire financial sector. For a company that just months earlier looked doomed, it was nothing short of a miracle. But Theo was not done playing high-stakes poker. In the aftermath of September 11th, Wall Street was in chaos. Many companies delayed or canceled their plans to go public. The markets were terrified. Investors were hiding. To most CEOs, it was the worst possible time to list a stock. To Peter Thiel, it was the perfect time. If you're in a world where no one goes public, he reasoned, maybe paradoxically that is the best time to go public, because you stand out against the chaos. It was a gamble worthy of PayPal's history, and in February 2022, that gamble paid off. By early 2002, PayPal had survived everything: cutthroat competition, a civil war at the top, and an endless siege from hackers, but it was still not safe. The dot-com bubble had already burst. Giants like Pets.com and Webvan had gone up in flames. Investors were terrified. Tech companies were toxic. In this climate, going public seemed suicidal. But Peter Thiel believed the opposite. If every other company was hiding, then PayPal could stand alone in the spotlight. Against the advice of many, he pressed forward with an initial public offering. On February 15, 2002, PayPal went public at $13 a share. The gamble paid off instantly. By the end of the first day, the stock closed at $20, valuing the company near $1 billion. For a team that once handed out $10 bills just to get people to sign up, this was vindication. Employees celebrated in true PayPal style: burgers, beer kegs, and speed chess tournaments in the parking lot. They had survived the impossible. But Wall Street was not the only one watching. Over at eBay, executives saw what was happening, and they did not like it. eBay had its own payment system, Billpoint, but compared to PayPal, it was a failure. Sellers hated it, buyers ignored it, and now nearly half of all eBay transactions were flowing through PayPal. eBay had two choices: crush PayPal or buy it. In July 2002, the answer came. eBay offered $1.4 billion to acquire PayPal. For Thiel and the board, it was too good to refuse. They had built a billion-dollar empire in just a few short years, and now the exit was in sight. The mood on PayPal's final day as an independent startup was anything but somber. Employees wrestled each other in giant sumo suits in the parking lot, laughing, drinking, celebrating the end of an era. For them, this was not the death of a company, it was the birth of a legend. The deal made Elon Musk $180 million richer. It gave Peter Thiel the war chest to seed future ventures. It allowed Max Levchin, Reid Hoffman, and others to fund the startups that would one day define the digital age. What nobody realized at that time was this: PayPal was not just a payments company, it was a launch pad. And from that launch pad would rise a new generation of billionaires who would dominate technology for the next 2 decades. They would later be called the PayPal Mafia. After the eBay acquisition, PayPal could have faded quietly into corporate history, but instead, it birthed a legend. A single photograph captured it all: a group of young men in hoodies and button-down shirts, lounging on couches, smirking like rebels who had just gotten away with something outrageous. Fortune magazine published it with a nickname that stuck forever: the PayPal Mafia. And like any mafia, their influence extended far beyond their original turf. Each member carried scars from the battles they fought inside PayPal: the paranoia, the betrayals, the near-death experiences. But those same scars hardened them. It made them fearless. It made them dangerous. And it made them billionaires. Elon Musk poured his $180 million into 2 insane bets: Tesla and SpaceX. Both nearly killed him financially, but both went on to redefine entire industries. Without PayPal money, there would be no reusable rockets and no electric car revolution. Peter Thiel founded Palantir, a company that now provides surveillance and data analytics for governments worldwide. His venture capital firm, Founders Fund, bankrolled companies like Facebook and Airbnb before they became household names. Reid Hoffman, once a quiet player at PayPal, launched LinkedIn, the social network for professionals that now has over 1 billion users. Max Levchin, the refugee coder who once built security apps for Palm Pilots, founded Affirm, pioneering buy now, pay later technology in online shopping. David Sachs, the consultant who left McKinsey for PayPal, went on to run Yammer and become a key Silicon Valley investor. Even the lesser-known alumni, Jeremy Stoppelman, Russell Simmons, Ralof Botha, went on to build or fund companies like Yelp, YouTube, and Sequoia's most iconic portfolio. Taken together, their combined net worth today exceeds the GDP of many countries. But money was only part of the story. What they created was a culture. At PayPal, survival had meant moving at breakneck speed, embracing chaos, and never waiting for permission. That ethos spread into every company they touched. It is why Tesla moves faster than traditional car makers, why LinkedIn scaled into the global resume, why Palantir thrives on secrecy and power. They were not just former colleagues. They were a syndicate, a network of power brokers who funded each other, defended each other, and in some cases competed against each other. Silicon Valley would never be the same again. What started as a quirky little app for Palm Pilots had become the foundation of a new world order. The PayPal mafia did not just change payments, they reshaped the very DNA of technology.